The market is actually saying, you go to university, you get your certificate, and then you come out, you graduate, and you start on 1,800 ringgit a month, because that's the average starting salary for a graduate. But what is the minimum wage? 1,700 ringgit a month. You might as well have not gone if that is your concern. If your concern is salary, you might as well have not gone for 4 years. Started at 1,700 ringgit. By the time your friends come out 4 years of university, salary's already gone up to 2.5. It's natural that Malaysia should trade with China. It's natural that Malaysia should trade with ASEAN countries. It's natural that Malaysia should trade with India. And it's natural that if they're trading with China and India, they would want to be part of BRICS. It's perfectly natural. It's not necessarily an assertion of, do I support the government in China, which is a one-party state, or do I support the democracy in India, which is the world's largest democracy? I don't believe in a middle-income nonsense. It is literally rubbish. It literally has no economic meaning. And I'll tell you why.
Hello, Internet. This is Copenhagen Council. Once again, new episode, new week. And of course, Adi, as you can see, viewers, we have a very different setup. I mean, just like the one we had in November last year.
Yeah, finally, me and Haffisz are once again reunited. The last time we were in the Sabah State Library for the collaboration with Sabah. And now, finally, I got the time to come down to KL. And of course, we are always going to be doing it at the KL podcast studio. But that means if we're doing it live, doing it in person, that means we do have something cooking up special for you. What is on today's agenda today?
Today we have an economist. Have you ever had an economist before?
No, it's the first time.
First time, right? All right. So, yeah, if you have any more questions about economy related, please put them down below. And you probably seen the thumbnail already, but I'm going to do the tradition that we always have on our channel here to introduce our guests using AI. So we're going to ask AI who is our guest today. And this is what Copilot, I'm using Copilot here. Today on the podcast, we are joined by powerhouse in economics and sustainability, Professor Geoffrey Williams. With a career spanning over 2 decades in Asia, he's currently Professor and a Dean of Postgraduate Studies at the Malaysia University of Science and Technology and a Senior Fellow at the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research. A Cambridge graduate, Professor Williams held academics posts at Oxford, London Business School, and University of London. He is a prolific author, media commentator, and a global voice on responsible management, higher education, and economics policy. His work has shaped CSR frameworks, influenced policy at the highest level, and earned him international recognition, including a Lifetime Contribution Award for Sustainability. How accurate is that?
Almost all of it, except that I'm not a professor at MUST anymore.
All right, so 99%, 95%? Okay, that's
the
good.
powerhouse bit, that was completely accurate.
Well, then we're in for quite an episode today then.
World-renowned, internationally famous bit, that was 100%.
I would like to frame this episode today we're going to start something like philosophical about economics first, and then we go on into, something that we can talk about the current issues based, right? So my first question to you, Prof, let's jump straight into it, Adi. All right. A global phenomenon where we see everyone have the ability to invest in something like a robo investment or ASB for us in Malaysia, very well known here. The ability for us to invest in certain company also biting us back in a way that these companies that we invest in have to promise certain kind of dividend to their shareholders, which makes them thinking, we should raise the price because we want to maintain that certain dividend that we promise. Is this a vicious cycle of greed as one of the 7 deadly sins? Because as economists, you would consider greed as externalities maybe, but in daily life, it's certainly not. So where do you come as an economist, but also in real life? This is a reality of us today.
You're saying in order to deliver a dividend to their shareholders, that might encourage them to raise prices in order to raise their revenues. That's what you're saying, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, no is the answer. But I mean, the answer is easy. The answer is no. But the reasons for that are not so easy. If they raise price, they're going to lose customers. If they have fewer customers, they're going to have lower revenue. If they have lower revenue, they're going to have lower profit. Actually, you don't really increase your profit by raising prices to your customers. All you do then is you make your customers annoyed and you lose customers. The best way to raise profitability from an economics perspective is to focus on cost efficiency. So cost efficiency helps to keep your production or service costs down. That means that actually you can offer lower prices to your customers, provided you're maintaining the margin. So when you're talking about the dividend is a sort of measure of the margin that they're giving. Part of that's going to their shareholders. The main aim is to try to deliver for their shareholders, whoever the shareholders are, try to deliver for them a good return on the investment. You don't always do that by pushing the price to the customer. We hear that a lot, though, don't we? I mean, everything. It rains in the morning, and then you get the Malaysia Employers Federation telling us that, this is going to push prices up for consumers. Yeah. This is rubbish. This is utter rubbish. If you see any business doing that, you should go find someone else to buy the product from, right? Consumers are smart. And if businesses are trying to make profits by passing on costs to customers, that's not a sustainable business model in the long term. The sustainable business model is to focus on cost efficiency, certainly from an economics perspective. Yeah, I mean, if I were giving you a discussion from a management perspective, or I was some sort of business guru trying to sell you my latest book, I might have a different view. But certainly from an economics perspective, the best way to run a business is to look at cost efficiency.
Just to pick up on that, okay, let's be business cost efficient now. So a company would outsource in China and somewhere else, and then this company would make a lot of profits. That way it comes in that the disparity between, maybe CEO in US being paid 200 times more than the average workers. Now that creates another problem within the company itself. So as an economist, how do you see this phenomena?
Well, there is a disparity between those in the more senior positions in companies and those at the least senior positions. We have it all around the world. The argument that they will give you is that they need to have these high salaries in order to encourage their performance. But then the counter to that is they say, well, I need to keep the salary of my employees down in order to encourage their performance. So there is an obvious contradiction. From an economics perspective, we would say you need to look at whether the performance of the people at the top, the chief executive officers in particular, whether it's reflecting the performance of the company. And if it's not, the shareholders have to step in to do something to stop that, because it's really the shareholders' responsibility to do that. Unfortunately, shareholders are disparate, particularly in countries like the US, for example. If it's a listed company on the New York Stock Exchange, they could have literally millions of shareholders, right? And they might have large institutional shareholders, and the large institutional shareholders will have a portfolio across many companies where the CEOs are overpaid. So from the perspective of shareholder capital, that type of excessive pay for chief executive officers should be regulated primarily by the shareholders. But because of that diversified shareholder base, with the millions of shareholders, there's a coordination problem. We have what they call a principal-agent problem. The principals are the shareholders. The agent is the chief executive officer. And there's a breakdown in the capacity of the shareholders to regulate the performance of the CEOs. So how do we deal with that? Or how could we deal with that? Well, because we have that structural problem, it's an obvious structural problem, the best way, I think, to do it is to call out the CEO. Just embarrass them, really. I mean, just humiliate them and just really make them account for themselves in the public domain, not necessarily to their shareholders, because that's only at the annual general meeting once a year, right? But to everybody, every day, to all of their stakeholders, to their employees, to their customers, to their mum, just to their friends, and just get them to say, why do you deserve to have this very large salary? Particularly, why should there be such a huge disparity between the salary that you have and the lowest paid groups within your company? How do you justify that? I tell you 100%, they just don't have a justification for that, except to say, well, if I wasn't paid this, you wouldn't get someone as good as me. Well, actually, they would. They would get someone very much better.
Well, if you got murdered on the broad daylight as CEO.
Unfortunately, although that's an absolutely horrible thing that happened, and it's not at all justified in any sense, you can understand why somebody would do that. And unfortunately, shooting someone in the back of the head in the street as a consequence of them using their position in a health insurance company, not just for themselves to have a massive high salary, but also to get that massively high salary by denying people access to the health insurance for which they paid their premium, you can understand why people would get angry about that. Of course, it's a criminal offense, so we couldn't advocate that. So I'm not advocating shooting someone in the back of the head. But what I am advocating is if you like, the equivalent of that in terms of their reputation. Humiliate them. Yeah.
And of
Call
course,
them out, all of them.
yeah, and of course, I mean, we don't have to go that far in terms of actions, right? What we see here in Malaysia, we've developed quite a proficiency in boycott culture.
Well, that's another alternative. Yeah. And I would also advocate that because that works. Boycotting companies on those grounds works. We tend to see boycotts here on grounds of Gaza or something like that, which is perfectly justified in my view. I mean, if you don't like the way the company is being run for whatever reason, you're not obliged to buy from that company. Yeah. And if you want to discourage other people from buying from that company because you feel the behavior of that company is unacceptable, that's your right. It's your right to do that. And if people want to boycott, let them boycott. If they don't want to boycott, they still go, they buy it. So you can do that. And if you feel that there's a reasonable justification for boycotting a company because of the pay disparity between the most senior people and the most junior people, and you want to boycott that company, my view is you should go ahead, you should do that because that's your right as an individual. And that is a complete question of free choice, individual free choice in the marketplace. So it's a purely market solution. It sounds like it's some sort of radical left-wing solution. It's not actually. It's a radical right-wing solution. If you don't like what this company is doing, don't buy the product. And if you're so angry about what this company is doing, discourage other people from buying that product. And that will surely make them change their behavior if they can. If they're able to, they will quickly change their behavior.
Okay, I'm going to move from corporate side of things to more academics. You yourself, Prof, are an academician. There was this viral story about a girl. She was teaching STEM subjects. She was an OnlyFans model, but she earns more from OnlyFans rather than her actual legitimate academic platform. And she describes that she makes more money than she ever did before by uploading her lectures on porn sites compared to mainstream academic platforms. So in a way, it's like, if I were to paint it in the music industry terms, like the academic world's the music industry, universities like the record labels, the middleman in a way. But now we've seen artists are becoming more independent. They no longer being producing with production companies. They're now self-releasing. And then in a way, when we take this phenomenon to, let's say, the academic stream, right? Would you say that you would see a shift when it comes to professors relying on streaming their lectures for their livelihoods in order to get people to attend their classes compared to more formal private institutions when it comes to livelihoods? Do you see any trend like that happening?
Okay, well, I wrote about this recently, and I made the point that, I was at Cambridge. That's where I did my undergraduate degree, and I taught in Oxford. And actually, historically, that's how academics in Cambridge and Oxford made a living. They weren't employed by the university, didn't have a salary. And so they would be paid by the students for each of the tutorial, if they were in Oxford, or the supervision, as we call it in Cambridge. And that's how they made a living. And sometimes they would be paid in food and wine.
In kind.
And even now we have gowns, master's gowns, and they have big pockets. And that's where you would put the bread and the wine in the pockets. And that's how people made a living. And in a sense, we have come full circle because, of course, academics began to take on full-time positions with universities, and they had a salary. But this model doesn't work anymore. Well, there are many reasons why it doesn't work, but I think amongst the main reasons why it doesn't work is this. Imagine you're an academic teaching a relatively esoteric subject. You might have a very small demand for that subject, but it might be extremely important. As a consequence, the university might say, well, your class size isn't big enough, so we're not going to run that program because we can't, it's uneconomic for us to run that program. And so what they do is they start to close these programs. You see very important subjects where they just close them down: philosophy, history, English literature, even in the sciences, biology, physics, chemistry. When I was in England, they were constantly shutting down physics courses because people were not taking physics. They were taking engineering because engineering was seen, for example, engineering was seen to have a very strong element of physics, but it was applied physics, of course. And then it's more vocational. You could see that you could easily get a job with an engineering degree, less easy to get a job as a physicist, right? But these are essential core, fundamental subjects, particularly when you think about philosophy and history and literature, these are fundamental. But if you look at private universities here in Malaysia, for example, you don't have philosophy programs. In fact, there isn't a single philosophy program in the whole country, public or private. There were one or two mixed programs, but there isn't a single degree in philosophy or a philosophy department. But this is fundamentally important to what we do as academics. But if the universities have shifted from that fundamentally important academic vocation, they're focusing much more on what is going to get you a job. And what that means is that some of these very important topics are not covered in universities anymore. And it's a lot. So a whole massive portfolio of things. But there is still a demand for it. And often you find, people talk about a brain drain and Malaysians going overseas to study. One of the main reasons that they go overseas to study is that they can't find these programs here. When I was teaching in Oxford, or even when I was in England, we had many, many, many Malaysian students. It was at that time the third largest number of international students. And they were coming to read programs like economics or PPE in Oxford, philosophy, politics, and economics. So these were very, very much in demand. And you would be hard pushed, even now, to find an economics degree in a private university. That's how, because the demand for it isn't there. But if academics are allowed, and this is quite an important consideration, they have to be allowed by the university. If they are allowed by the university and by the ministry to set up as academics in private practice, you could have any academic with a degree in any subject, philosophy, astrophysics, whatever it is, right? Stephen Hawking would not get a job in a Malaysian university because there isn't a faculty where they could put him. Right? So it's that type of thing. Einstein would not get a job in a university in Malaysia because there isn't a faculty where you could sit him and they wouldn't have a program that he would teach. But if guys like this wanted to set up and to teach their own subject, why not? Why not? Then people could register with a university and take their tuition from whoever is offering that tuition, whether or not they happen to be faculty at that university. Now, what would happen is you would open up the market. The best academics would get huge classes. And then people say, well, that means that some of the others wouldn't get big classes. But I don't think that's always true, actually, because students have preferences for different types of professors, don't they? If they came to a powerhouse economist like me, they might be a bit scared that it was going to be too technical. It probably would be really quite technical if I were to do it. And they might prefer someone else's approach. It's perfectly fine. I have no problem with this at all. They might prefer to be in a smaller class. They might prefer to be in an all-women's class or all-men's class, whatever. They would have those preferences. So academics who are offering across this entire range to an audience of 1.5 million students in Malaysia would find plenty of customers, so to speak. And the idea that I was putting forward was this idea of having academics in private practice. Just like you have lawyers in private practice and you have medical practitioners in private practice, right? They don't need to work at a single hospital. You go to a private hospital. None of those consultants are actually employed by the hospital. They're private practitioners who practice at that facility. You could do the same with the universities. And I think that academics would earn very, very much more, actually, if they did that. And they would enjoy it more. They would have more freedom. They would have better work-life balance. And one of my colleagues suggested setting up an OnlyFans site. I'm not sure how successful that would be.
Technical economics right there.
Would be for me. I didn't know what it was when he said it. Now I did some research.
Nice cover.
I do know what it is, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily where I would go at my age. I might have done it earlier.
But you see, that comes back to the conversation that these education institutions, right? There's too much power vested into them. They get to decide what programs or what faculties are important. They would slash it. Now we see like humanities, not just in Malaysia, across the board, humanities and liberal arts is becoming seen as not profitable, not employable. And then they're saying that now that can be easily replaced with AI.
Yes.
You can use AI to say all those things.
So this is why they're failing, these universities. I mean, let's be clear. These universities are not successful. Whether they're public or private university, they're not successful. And one of the reasons why they're not successful is it's like going into a mamak stall and they're serving the same thing every day, right? And they're seeing that fewer and fewer customers are coming in, or it's just grumpy old men sitting there, right? Because it's the same old thing. And they're asking, where are all the kids going? Well, the kids are going to all of the other shops and
Matcha latte.
everything. Yeah, they're all going for their bubble tea and everything around, right? And that's the point, really. The universities are offering a menu of programs that actually people don't want to study, and they're finding different ways of studying it. We've just seen this controversy about this. The student wanted to read a particular program, wasn't able to do it, was pushed into another program. Somebody wanted to read law, couldn't get onto the law program, was pushed into accountancy or something, as if, what the hell has law got to do with accountancy? It's a wholly different subject, right? But this is the idea that they're being pushed into streams that they actually don't want to do. And then they're not happy with these programs, and then they underperform with these programs. But then if they're given a program that they're happy with and they want to pursue it, why not? Let them do it. If they want to do history, why are they being pushed into management? Well, the answer to that is there isn't a history program. But there are plenty of academic historians in Malaysia who could easily set up their own program. If people came, they would be paid. If people didn't come, they wouldn't be paid. That's it. It's a gig. Okay, but they would make a good income if they did that. But it's a matter of freedom of choice. Now, actually, the market will push people that way. And you can see some areas, particularly in IT, many of the IT faculties in universities are just collapsing. Why is this? Well, because you have to go on a 4-year course, including your foundation. You have to do all of this coding and all of this stuff. And actually, people can go to get a Microsoft certificate, or they can go online and learn how to build an app. They don't need a 3 or 4 year degree to do this. So they go get their certificate somewhere else, right? And that means that the admissions into these programs is falling. And then people say, the government must step in, government should step in and push people into IT. It's not that we don't have people qualified in IT. We do. They're just not going to university to get that qualification. And we're seeing that increasingly with business degrees. We're seeing it also with MBA programs, where people don't want the whole MBA program anymore, particularly if it's being stretched out now to 18, even 24 months in some instances. They don't want to do that, particularly if it means taking time out of work and all of that. They want little snippets, the bits that are important. And they want it to come from credible organizations. They want it to come from credible people. Where do they get that? They get that online now. They get that in the marketplace now. They don't need to go to the universities to get that anymore. So the universities are losing that product value. And the role of the universities was really just to credentialize your learning. And now they're losing even that, because people are looking at the university credential, the certificate, and they're seeing that it's not signaling what it used to signal in the past. So people are saying, well, why am I paying 20, 30,000, 40,000, sometimes, 30,000 ringgit a year to do this? Some certificates are 30,000 for 3 years. And people are saying, why am I doing that? Because I don't need that.
I mean, in many podcasts and interviews, you mentioned that university is just no longer worth it. But what would you say to those in the rural areas that already now in Form 4 or Form 5 approaching living SPM, that the only way they see to social mobility is university? In the form of formal education, tertiary education, they only see university. What would you say to them?
I would say go to university if you want to go to university. University is not really universities were never designed as vocational schools. And unfortunately, that's what they've become. They become uplifted vocational training schools. And they were never supposed to be that. They were never designed to be that. Historically, the earliest universities in North Africa and in the Levant,
Lebanon.
In the Lebanon, all of that area in Egypt and all of that, that's where the origins were. But then the European universities in Oxford and Cambridge are amongst the oldest. These were never designed for vocational purposes. These were designed for actualization, what we call it now, self-actualization. These were designed for what you've just mentioned. You live in a rural area. You want to change your life. You have hopes and dreams. You want to go. You want to find a different way looking at the world. You want to meet different types of people. You want to be independent for a bit. You want to get out of your kampong, where you're from. There's nothing at all wrong with that, right? That's what universities were for. But now what universities have become is uplifted training centers. And they're failing in that regard, because nearly half of graduates are coming out of university not able to find a job. And there are a range of reasons for that. One is they're being pushed into the wrong type of programs. But the other reason is that academics are not the right people to train you how to do a job, because we've never had a job outside of a university. Why would I know? I teach courses in management or economics and accounting, business, that whole portfolio. I don't know how to be an accountant. I'm not an accountant. I'm a national income accountant. I can do GDP. You want me to work out GDP? I can do it. But double entry bookkeeping, someone else will be doing. I can't do it. So we are not actually the right people to be doing that. Our job, the only job that we can train you to do, is to be an academic. But if you don't want to be an academic, what we can help you to do is to actualize, is to find different ways of thinking about the world, expose you to different types of material that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily have seen before. If you find material that you're interested in, we can help you come to an understanding of that material. We can help you to balance that material from other sources. You're interested in this. But this is something that's also similar. It's in the same topic, but it's wholly different. But this is a left-wing view of economics. This is the right-wing view of economics. This is the middle view of economics. This is a view of economics that's neither left, right, or middle, right? We can show you this and help you to come to an understanding about that and to find out what critical analysis is, how you interpret that. That's what we can do. And in the past, when I went to university, that was why we went to university. But only 20% of my age cohort went to university. And people said, oh, that's because it's an elite. It wasn't because it's an elite. It's because we were rubbish at everything else. The only thing we could do was study. Right? I come from Liverpool. If you're an elite sportsman, that's very much better. If you say, I went to Liverpool Football Club, or I went even to Everton Football Club, God forbid. But, if you went for that, that's very much more important than saying I went to Cambridge or Oxford. They would say, oh, really? What did you do there? That's what they would do. We went to university not because it was an elite, but because it was what we want to do. We wanted to continue to study in the chosen field. And for me, that was economics. But for some of my friends, that was Anglo-Saxon, Norse, and Celtic. They wanted to study about Vikings and that sort of stuff. They wanted to do classics, which was basically classical Greek and Roman antiquities, as well as literature and philosophy. That's what they wanted to do. They want to do history. They want to do literature, all manner of things. And of course, they want to do the sciences as well. But when they want to do the sciences, they want to do pure chemistry, and they want to do pure physics, and they want to do pure biology, not applied. We did have an engineering program, of course, but we had only 3 basic vocational programs. One was engineering, one was medicine, the other was law. Other than that, the rest of us were on non-vocational programs. And that's because we'd gone to university, not because we were viewing it as a stepping stone to a career, but we were viewing it as a way of living our lives, self-actualization. In the end, of course, we all got jobs. Of course. So it never harmed us. And we tended to get jobs at senior levels. We would always go into the graduate entry level. You do then the graduate program. And then eventually, they're all CEOs now, right? It never stopped them. Doesn't matter what they were studying.
Yeah, I mean, I just to circle back to this point is that, of course, you mentioned the original intent for the universities was exploration of the mind, right? When I went to university in the UK, it really was an experience where you're exploring and you're doing it for the sake of the subject itself.
Yes.
Not for the sake of, okay, I can get a job later. Then I come back here and I did my master's here. Even though the lecturers were trying to do it for the sake of the art itself, the subject itself, you cannot help but feel that a lot of people were there just because getting a master's means I can get a promotion.
Yes.
And this, I feel like it's become a monolithic idea of universities and academic institutions, is that you own, like you mentioned, it's just there to accredit and validate what you study. Through that sense, is that it becomes hard to reverse that mentality, is that you have to go to university. But when it comes back to the matter is, you don't really need the university to tell you that you're smart or you can do kind of work.
The market is reversing it, strangely, because the market is actually saying, you go to university, you get your certificate, and then you come out, you graduate, and you start on 1,800 ringgit a month, because that's the average starting salary for a graduate. But what is the minimum wage? 1,700 ringgit a month. You might as well have not gone if that is your concern. Yeah. If your concern is salary, you might as well have not gone for 4 years. Started at 1,700 ringgit. By the time your friends come out 4 years of university, salary's already gone up to 2,500. And he's going to be starting at 1,800. Now, eventually, his salary will rise more quickly than yours. But at that stage, you also can upgrade your skills, right? Depending on what area you're in. Let's say you're in IT, you can go do a Microsoft certificate. You can learn how to make an app. You can do all of that sort of stuff. And you can also increase your salary beyond that. If that's your aim, you don't need to go to university to achieve that. And actually, when you take into account how much it costs you in terms of fees,
Loans,
and crippling loans, and then the 4 years that you weren't earning any money, the opportunity cost is only recoverable. And I also did some work on this. It's only recoverable after about 8 years. It takes 8 years to recover the opportunity cost. That's the tuition fees, lost income, all of that, paying off your debt.
12 years in total, you'll be.
Yes, but then by 8 years, what you learned is already obsolete. So then you have to go back.
Reskill again.
To reskill, to get your MBA or whatever it is, upgrade. Then you're back into the paying the loan, all of that. So the market is telling people that it's not working. And as a consequence of that, there will be a correction.
But you mentioned the market's telling them, right? But we're having all these programs, or even this kind of mentality here in Malaysia, I think Asia in general, is that you have to go to tertiary education or else you're not worth to be part of the labor pool, right? You're not considered prestigious enough to be working here, right? So you said the market is correcting it, but the government is very dead set on TVET. They're dead set on ensuring tertiary education.
If the government want you to go to university, let them pay for it. I'm all for it. If businesses want you to go to university, want you to study a particular program, let them pay for it. And then people who want to do it, let them go, let them choose to do it. But if you are paying for this, you get to choose, not the government. You get to choose, not some company, tells you have to go and study this program and learn these things in order to come to work for me. No, that's not how it works. You want me to work for you, you pay my training. You don't want to pay my training? I'll work somewhere else. Work for myself. And another issue for the universities is they are not teaching people to be entrepreneurial. If you look at the graduate outcome statistics, we call it the Tracer study, 90% of graduates who go into the workplace and find something to do in the workplace, they're employed by somebody. Only 10% who become employers or entrepreneurs themselves. And so you really have to ask the question, what are the universities training people to do? They're training people to be employees in jobs that increasingly are not there because AI is taking over. If you think about accountancy, and we're churning out tens of thousands of accountants every year, and then you can just download some AI accounting package and have it all done. Yeah. So that type of program is becoming increasingly useless in the labor market. But philosophy will always be useful. History will always be useful. Creativity will always be useful. Because even if you want to use AI to write a novel or to write a book, you still have to have the idea to tell the AI bot what it is you wanted to write in the first place. And you have to have the judgment to see whether it's good or not. And that's what we can teach at universities. So the market will solve this problem. But for the universities, unfortunately, they're not going to catch up quickly enough. And that means that many of them are already struggling. Many of them are already close to bankruptcy. And in fact, we see this all the time in the public domain. You open up a newspaper online every day, one way or another, and you can see the universities are struggling with this. So they're going down.
Recently, you were talking about labor market, and recently, Rafiz Ramli on his podcast, he revealed that in Malaysia 13 plan, that how they omit the element of marketability in their statistics. Instead, they change with matching employment statistics, because he argued that marketability even it contributes unemployment for the people, because let's say you're a graduate of engineering, but you might as well be working at the supermarket as a cashier, and you are still it tick the boxes. So it says it's skewed the numbers. So what they want to do now is matching employment. What's your opinion on this? And what is the impact on the labor market? And how can government make sure this happens?
Well, look, let me just be blunt. The government cannot do this.
Okay.
Simple as that. It just cannot be done. It's a foolish idea. Philosophically, it's a very stupid idea. And in practical terms, it simply cannot be done by a government. I mean, what are we? Do we live in the Soviet Union? This is a mixed economy in Malaysia, right? There's a very important role for the government in the economy, but this is not a centrally planned economy like North Korea. You cannot say you study one program because you are going to work for this place, and you study another program because you're going to work for this place, and I'm going to match you with this, and I'm going to match you with that. This can't be done. It's absurd, absolutely absurd to suggest such a thing. The only thing that you can do is allow the market to create the jobs, right? And then allow people to go and choose the level of qualification that they want for themselves. And then they match what they want to do with what's available. If they have an engineering degree and they want to work flipping burgers in a fast food chain for a short time, why not? Why not? You know, to say that someone with an engineering degree can't do that, you know what that is called? It's called snobbery. It's just pure snobbery, right? The guy will do it, but as long as it's necessary for him to pay off his debt or get himself together or find another job, and that guy's doing an honest, decent day's work, he's getting not a very good salary, but then he's not going to be there for the whole of his life, right? And why do people think that that's a bad thing? You know, we've had these stories about graduates becoming Grab drivers or delivery riders. Why not? Why should they not do that? You know, they will get more delivering through Food Panda or something like that, or Lazada or whatever it is, than they will if they go become a lawyer, because the lawyers don't get paid. They've only recently, the bar has introduced guidance on how to pay your graduate lawyers. Only in the last few months that they introduced that, right? So why shouldn't they do that? You know, the whole point about going to university is not to prepare you for the labor market. It's to prepare you for life. It's to give you choices. And when you leave, you just make whatever choice comes along. And there's nothing wrong with that. You'll make good choices, you'll make bad choices, but you'll learn quickly about which are good and the bad choices. And eventually you'll sort it out and you'll be better. And why? Because you grew up and you didn't rely, you know, your nenek at home and then your nenek in the economy ministry telling you what to do, right? This is the nanny state. What's interesting and what's good about the 13th Malaysia Plan is that most of it won't be implemented. So let's look forward to it.
That's the first time I've heard of that, really. Okay, but I like this where we're going this conversation. I mean, really reminds me of Keynes and Hayek and all the economic theories.
I'm not a Keynesian, by the way. Forget it. No, forget it. I'm the antithesis of that. Although I did have to read that. This is the thing. And this is why I'm not a Keynesian, because when I was at Cambridge, I had to read it. Can you imagine that? I even went to the shop and found, tried to find Keynes for Dummies, and it had all been sold out. Because all the other students had gone there before me. They got up earlier.
That was sort of me for Hayek. But
yeah, and then I had to read something else. Yeah. And I found the slimmest volume I could find, which was John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. It's very slim. And I thought, that's the one for me. It was that, and that was next to Karl Marx, and Karl Marx was in 3 big volumes. I said, I can't even carry that book, let alone read it.
So on that note, because you really mentioned the nanny state, right? You mentioned that government's role shouldn't be in meddling in the market or any of these things, right? And you've sort of characterized a lot of things which resemble the gig economy, the Grab riders, and even the way you describe how education providers can do it in their own private way, in a gig way, right? So what do you think of the Malaysian government's approach to the gig economy so far? I'm sure you've taken a look and they've recently passed a new policy on it. Do you still feel it's coddling and pampering, or is it really actually?
All right. So I was very concerned about that because I'm a big fan of the gig economy, and also its more broader terms. So we call it the sharing economy, or sometimes we call it the platform economy. I don't view gig economy as just being delivery riders or e-hailers, P-hailers and e-hailers, what they call them. It's not that. I mean, I mentioned earlier lawyers. Lawyers are gig economy workers. Medical practitioners at private hospitals are gig economy workers. They only get paid when they're treating a patient. If there's no, if they're a cardiologist and no one turns up with a heart problem that day, they don't get any. Well, of course they will. Every day people have a heart problem. But if it's another issue, right? There's a specialism in some issue and nobody turns up, then they don't get paid, right? They're gig workers as well. Working in the gig economy, working in the shared economy or the platform economy sectors, in my view, is a wholly liberating new way of giving people opportunities to earn a living. Many people balance it with a full-time job or a part-time job. In fact, if you take a Grab, I advise you always to speak to the driver and ask them how they're doing, how many rides they'd had during the day, and then you'll find it fascinating. Many of them will tell you that it's not their main job. and they're always doing other things. Sometimes they're accountants. My friend asked the guy, the Grab driver, what he did. He said he was a policeman, and then suddenly he was on his best behavior. But the point is that the gig economy is not always about low skill, low pay work. It's not. What the gig economy is about is, as we were talking about before, like academics, you have a product or a service to offer into the market, and you get paid only when people want that. In the past, it was very hard to know whether people wanted that or not because the shops were physical spaces. Now the shop is on a platform. The shop is on your phone, right? So if you can get access to that technology, which we all can, and get onto these sharing economy platforms, you can get access to a global market for some of the things that you do. And you're not restricted to the local market. And that's hugely liberating because it means that you don't have to earn a salary. You don't have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get in a traffic jam to get to work. You're not fixed, for this, arrive at 8 o'clock, have a 1 hour lunch and leave at 5. And if you 5 minutes either way, you're going to get scolded. And you don't have to go through all of that. You have no one looking over your shoulder, telling you what to do, patronizing you, bullying you, pushing you around, right? Unless you're at home when it's your cats or something like that to do. You don't have anything like that. You're a completely free agent. You have very much more choice, right? And for me, as a market economist, I believe in freedom of choice. I think it's hugely liberating. In fact, when I was at school and I first started my economics, I spoke to my economics teacher about this. His name was Dennis Wilde. And I said to him, why is it that we don't have it like this? And he said, because we don't have the framework for it. And that was true at that time. People got a job, they had a contract, they got a salary. That's how it was. And there was no other way that you could do it, short of putting in the back of a newspaper in the classified ads, hoping that someone would find it. But there's no way there's no technology to do that. But now we do have that technology. It could be anything that you have to offer, anything that you have to sell. There would be potential market for it, even if it's not here in Malaysia, or if it's not here immediately in the street in front of your shop. And that's hugely valuable. The government is helping in this. MDEC have an entire sharing economy program. I've been working with those guys and they're really cool. And they are helping with this. They're trying to provide opportunities for people to use the sharing economy and the platform economy better. Now, my fear was that all the gig companies are on this program with MDEC, for example. Now, my fear was that the government were going to use this Gig Economy Commission to start interfering in that. But when I saw the Gig Economy Bill, I actually think it was perfect. Because what it's doing, it's not interfering, but it's giving people rights. If you are in the gig economy, you have rights now, and you can enforce those rights. So you sell something to somebody and they don't pay you, right? What would that mean in the past? Well, in the past, that would mean you'd have to go to the High Court, the Sessions Court, and you'd have to pay a lawyer and it would take forever. Now, this offers opportunities and forms of tribunal where you can get a legal remedy more quickly. So I'm keen on that. And it also gives you opportunities to get social protection, and I'm keen on that. So it appears to me that what they've done, what Stephen Sims done in particular with that bill, is perfect. He hasn't interfered in the market, but he has provided the basic legal framework. Because even as a market economist, I always say every single market requires a legal framework. You don't have a legal framework, you can't have a market. There has to be enforceability of a transaction. And what he's basically doing is putting the legal framework for the enforceability of the transaction. That will protect gig economy workers without killing the market, without closing down the innovation and the creativity that we're seeing. We did some work, as I say, for MDEC, and our view was that you would be getting something like 4 million people pretty soon will be working in the sharing economy and gig economy platforms. And that's about a quarter of the working population.
All right. Kopitiam Council is mainly a geopolitics topic related that we discuss here. So we have to bring it back a little bit to the geopolitics arena where you talk recently about the Malaysian involvement in BRICS and how it impact and all that. We definitely going to go back to universities and whatnot in a minute. But for now, how would you see in the ties between the US and China. Is Malaysia paving itself a right way in the middle of maneuvering in the middle of all of this? Or are we just, maybe blind leading the blind?
I see a lot of different things happening. That's how I see it. So if you ask me how do I see it, what I see is a lot of different things happening very quickly. So only recently, the Prime Minister was in China I don't know exactly when it is, but in a few weeks, President Trump will be here. Yes. President Trump is now in United Kingdom on a state visit. And I see what the Prime Minister, what Anwar has been doing, is to go wherever he can go, to get whatever deals he can get, to see what's out there. And that's what he should be doing. Because Malaysia is a non-aligned, this is not my professional opinion as an economist, this is a geopolitical view. But the geopolitical position is that Malaysia is a non-aligned country. It's a neutral country. But it does have natural alliances with the OIC, for example, and so on. That these natural alliances arise out of sometimes just basic geography, but also they arise out of natural trade interaction, and it's natural that Malaysia should trade with China. It's natural that Malaysia should trade with ASEAN countries. It's natural that Malaysia should trade with India. And it's natural that if they're trading with China and India, they would want to be part of BRICS. It's perfectly natural. It's not necessarily an assertion of, do I support the government in China, which is a one-party state, or do I support the democracy in India, which is the world's largest democracy? Not to me. They're not making a political statement. Anwar's not making particularly a political statement. He's saying we can trade with both, because these are collectively nearly 3 billion people. So it just makes absolute sense to do that. And now don't imagine that the Chinese aren't trading with the Americans. They are. The British are trading with the Chinese. The British are trading with the Indians. So if it's good enough for the United Kingdom, it's good enough for Anwar. We are not part of the European Union in the United Kingdom anymore. So our trade representatives are going all around the world constantly getting involved in these sort of things. And that's how trade should be done. It's multilateral. And that means you have to be part of the groupings, but you're not exclusively part of the groupings, right? You're trading with these guys. You're not marrying them. That's the way it is. You're doing trade. And trade means speak to who you can sell to, speak to who you can buy from, speak to countries where their companies want to invest here and where your companies can go there and make good investments. That's what he's doing, and that makes sense to me. But you see, very often I'm asked on a particular episode. So when the Prime Minister goes to China, what does this mean on a particular episode? So when Trump comes here, what does this mean about that particular Trump episode? Now, my view is nothing in particular. It's part of a whole matrix of trade interactions, which should overall improve overall trade, but it also reduces the risk of Malaysia just putting all your eggs in one basket. That's better for the country.
Back to the whole this whole alignment, because you mentioned like how people get asked that visits, right, are done on an episode by episode basis. Right? Anwar's in China, this could change everything, right? Yeah. Or we go to now, I think it was in Dubai the other day.
Yes,
it changes everything, right? But you did mention how the way that the Prime Minister postures himself as just not being part of the grouping, but just being around enough that he would have a conversation, then say that, hey, let's work on something together, right? But how does this speak for more of his, I would say, the moral messages that he sends out? Because he's been very actively pushing for the rapid end of the genocide in Gaza, right? How much of a bearing does that have with other countries? By posturing that moral message, right? Does that send a negative connotation to countries that are aligned with Israel, or in the grand scheme of global economics?
Well, look. Donald Trump is in the United Kingdom today on a state visit. Yesterday, he was having dinner with the king, and he was really enjoying himself. But then there's a UN meeting next week, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is going to go there with the President of France and the Canadian Prime Minister, and they are going to recognize the Palestinian state. That's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Right? So what the Prime Minister is doing, what Anwar is doing, is making Malaysia's position clear. And it's always been clear, but he's making it absolutely clear. And he's in very good company. That's it. That's what I would say, because the French president has a similar view. The British Prime Minister the British government has a similar view. Government in Canada has a similar view, and that's meaningful, right? So what he's doing is not setting himself or setting Malaysia separately. It's actually part of a very wide alignment of an increasingly large global community. You look at what's going on in Gaza. and find it absolutely abhorrent, unacceptable. And so he's not alone in doing that. And he's being very brave to do that. And I think also because Malaysia isn't seen as being a fundamentalist Islamic country, but a very moderate Islamic country, when somebody like him makes a statement like that, people listen to it actually, because they don't dismiss it as being, oh, well, you always say that.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't always say that. Malaysia doesn't always take a position. So I think it's valuable in that sense.
Because I think the question is, why is he making so much noise about this always on the international stage?
Because it's wrong.
Yeah,
that's why. I mean, why is he making so much noise? Because it's wrong.
Yeah. And in a way, it helps socialize other countries into thinking.
Yes.
If he's saying, like you said, if he's saying that, then that is something we have to.
Yes. And there are other countries in ASEAN who feel the same way. And Malaysia is the chairing of ASEAN. They can't always say it. For various reasons, they're not able to take a position. Often the reasons they're not able to take a position is because they have domestic issues that go on. They're not on the international platform. But at the moment, Dato Sri Anwar is on the international platform because Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN.
Yeah. As a salesman of Malaysia, he goes around countries and the buzzword that's always thrown around is AI. Not only its initials, but also artificial intelligence. And you know, he mentioned about Infineon, big companies, Amazon doing data centers here. We all know data centers require a lot of resources, natural resources like water, for example, and electricity. Is this the right way where Malaysia is going? Because we are at the brink of, you know, trapped in the middle income countries. And is this the way that we're going to finally burst that bubble?
No, it's not. It's not the way. There is a lot of discussion about the data centers. But then if I go to Vietnam or if I go to Thailand or if I go to England, you know, there are data centers all over the world. So, I mean, these are important infrastructural investments. There's no question about that. But we all know that data centers are basically black or dark factories, as they call them, because there's no people. It's a very, very small, once it's built, in other words, once it's built, the infrastructure is in place and it's sitting there humming. Basically, there are very few people just doing maintenance. It's not a big employer. And the companies are foreign companies. And that means any of the profit is going to be repatriated. So we really shouldn't look at that as being a big game changer in terms of employment or in terms of return on foreign direct investment. There will be some benefits to that for sure. And there will also be benefits because the data centers here and people will be using it.
What would be, in your opinion, would break through that from the trap of middle income countries?
I don't believe in a middle income nonsense. It is literally rubbish. It literally has no economic meaning. And I'll tell you why. This is a World Bank definition. And the World Bank categorized countries into upper income, middle income, upper middle, lower middle, and then low income. And the reason they do that is because the World Bank is not allowed to give money to high income countries. They cannot lend money to high income countries. And they can only give a particular type of assistance to middle income countries, which is what Malaysia has. Malaysia has a World Bank office by Bank Negara, in that building behind Bank Negara, Sasana Kijang, right? Yeah. Have a World Bank office. The type of activity the World Bank do here is advisory. They're not lending money to Malaysia. The World Bank really only lends money in terms of development aid to low-income countries. And that's what the definition is for. It's to see which of those categories you're in. Nothing to do with the level of economic development, actually. I mean, there's no meaning in that sense. So, but we have had this, it's gone on forever. I think, where did this arise? I think it came from the Economic Transformation Program in 2010. And we said at that time, I was working with a group of my friends, all economists, and we said at that time, the target was to get to the high income group by 2020. We said it's just not going to happen. It simply isn't going to happen. 2020 came and gone. Now I think, what's the next one? 2030 or something, is it? It means it's never going to happen. And it's a foolish thing. It's an absolutely foolish thing. What you need to be looking at are, what is the standard of living and the quality of life of your people? Not in comparison to the Singaporeans or in comparison to people in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a high-income country, right? But it is very poorly populated. There's very few people. Yeah. And it's not a manufacturing country. You know, it doesn't produce anything, really, apart from oil. Everything it has, it buys. So it doesn't make any sense to compare yourself with that country. Liechtenstein is a high-income business.
It's so small.
It's tiny, and it makes no sense to compare yourself with that. What you really must look at is the economic development of your own people set against what they have a reasonable expectation to achieve, and ask them, are you getting what you want? Are you getting enough of what you want? Of course, are you getting what you need? And are you getting enough of what you need? That's a basic thing. Yeah. But are you getting enough of what you want? And do you have the opportunities that you need? And is your income holding you back from those opportunities? And if you feel that the income level is holding people back from what they want to do, then you have to push the income level up. And that is the problem in Malaysia, is that there's a stagnant low income, not per capita income, right, which would get you closer to being a middle income country per person in your pocket. I mean, the median salary is only 3,000 ringgit, which means half of people working in formal employment get less than 3,000 ringgit. That's why they're all going into the gig economy, right?
I mean, in the last few minutes that we have left, less than 10 minutes actually, I just have one question left for
10 minutes.
Didn't feel that.
Yeah, about that. We cannot let you go if we do not talk about subsidy rationalizations and the mechanism about it. So government proposing of using my card and whatnot. What's wrong with the cash transfer? Why do you think government doing this?
There's nothing wrong with the cash transfer. Cash transfer would be a perfectly good thing. But I think what's happened is they realize that many people are unbanked. They don't have bank accounts, and it's astonishing to imagine that's still the case in the 21st century. But it is actually the case that many people don't have bank accounts. So this idea of transferring cash into people's bank accounts is actually very difficult because they don't have bank accounts. So when they did the PADU thing, and you're supposed to register, they could, in principle, then say, oh, by the way, tell us about your banking. But of course, people are not going to do that because it's private, right? And you can't literally hand out cash to people. You could, in principle, get them go to post office and pick it up, or the BSN. You can go pick it up from somewhere, but that's not practicable. So I think the only pragmatic solution that they found is the MyCard, because everybody has a MyCard. I don't have a. I have no skin in the game when it comes to subsidy or cash transfer. But everyone has the MyCard, and they can transfer to the MyCard easily. But formally, it's not cash. And what that means is they're restricting. It's still a nanny state because they're restricting to what you can spend it on and also the shops where you can buy it. But what we've seen in the most recent cash, I'm supposed to call it cash under because it's not cash under, but what we've seen in the cash assistance program, the SARA cash assistance, is the first time that we've had this universal transfer. And I think that is clearly a pilot by the government to see does it work or not at a universal level as a precursor to the petrol subsidy. And what they found is that it works. Right. So there were some technical glitches to begin with, but now it's 99% transaction success. So it works. And what they're finding is that actually the average use is about 65 ringgit out of the 100 ringgit. So people are using it for bits, but they're still saving a little bit. Why does that matter? Well, if you're going to deal with the petrol subsidy, you're going to remove it from the price, right? But you still have to compensate people for the fact that the price is, well, actually the price will go down because the price is going to be at 199. The price is going to be at 199, but it's always charged at 2, right? Because you don't have 1 cent coin. Yeah. So anyways, let's just be realistic. It's 2 ringgit. So it's going to go down by 5 cents. All right, which is good enough. All right. So the price will go down to begin with, but eventually it's going to float. So that price is going to go up eventually. Slowly, it will start to rise. And that means you will have to compensate people for that. The target is to compensate 85% of the population so that only 15% don't get that compensation. So one way of doing that is to put the 100 ringgit on the MyCard every month and allow you to use it to buy petrol in addition to the other 14 categories. That's the simplest thing. And it's purely pragmatic. My preference would be give people cash, right? But I've spoken about this at length to many people, and I am now persuaded it's just not practical to do that. I would prefer it. There is an alternative, which is you put the 100 ringgit on the MyCard, and you can go to the shop and get 100 ringgit in cash. You remember you used to get cash back? I don't know if you can still do that. You can get cash back. That's another alternative. And they can do that. They just need to change the algorithm. So instead of buying stuff, they just give you the money. So that's an alternative. But I think that's what they're going to do. We don't know the exact details, but I think what they're going to do is simply to say, I'm putting the money on your MyCard, and you can now you can spend it on petrol.
Before we wrap it up, one more last question from me, Prof, is that you did mention the nanny state a few times, right? And we have skirted around the role of government in the market, right? Where you definitely made it clear that they should be interfering, right? But you also said that they should be setting up legal frameworks so that the market is able to thrive, innovation is allowed without them entering, right? But I mean, when it comes to, let's say, for example, privatization in Malaysia, right? Just want to gauge your opinion on this, because we do have in Malaysia numerous amounts of government-linked companies which get a lot of windfall from the government. In Sabah, we have 250 plus government GLCs.
My God.
Which only a handful are probably performing and giving actual dividends back to the state government.
Yes.
What can we say about talking about more about privatization in Malaysia, like the role of GLCs? What's your opinion?
Well, I think people don't quite realize how many GLCs there are. And also that it's not just at the federal level, it's also at the state level.
Yes.
And my friend Terence Gomez did a very big study on this. And he took the top 30 GLCs, which are all the big name GLCs, Maybank and all of these people, right? And he found that there was something like 68,000 subsidiaries of those top 30. But then when you do it at state level, you find, you find hundreds. Most of them are not performing. They're not returning any sort of dividend or anything back to the state or to the federal government. They're not. Now, Terence would say, close them down, right? I would say, well, they're actually an asset. The question is, are they a going concern or not? And if they're a going concern, sell it. Sell it to the employees, sell it to the directors, sell it to somebody else. I mean, I wrote a paper for Ideas, the think tank Ideas, called Responsible Privatization. Because in the past, certainly in the United Kingdom under Margaret Thatcher, the idea was you just sell it to anyone who's going to buy it, whether they're responsible or not, we don't care. We even sold it to the French. We even sold it to the Malaysians. YTL bought one of our water companies. So we didn't really mind about who bought it. We just sold it. Many of these companies were then asset stripped, and that was irresponsible because people lost their jobs as a consequence of that. So my approach is responsible privatization, which is to sell it to people who have a responsible agenda in terms of owning and running the company. But my view on that is sell it because it's a going concern. And then you can recover back to the state. The state invested, right? And then the state can recover its investment if it sells it. If the state is just pumping money into an underperforming state-owned company, where is the return for the people in the state? Where is the return for the taxpayer on that? If you were a private conglomerate and you had all of these companies that were not performing, what would you do with this? You'd sell them. You'd sell them or you close them. So why doesn't the government do that? But provided it does it responsibly and it's recovering some of that money, that's recovery back for the rakyat. Then it goes back into the coffers of the state or goes back into the coffers of the federal government. And my view is that that should be put into a new pension fund. You can sell it, privatize it, put it into a pension fund, help people to that. Then it's the state helping your nanny. It's not the nanny state anymore. The state is helping your nanny. And you can do that. You can make a great deal. I made the point, if there are 68,000 subsidiaries of these 30 biggest GLCs, and each one of them was worth ringgit 1 million, right? Well, what's 68,000 times 1 million ringgit? It's
huge.
68 billion, right? There's 68 billion just there. And all you need to do is find a buyer. Now, my view is privatize. Yeah. Terence's view would be close them. All right. Well, my view is if it's not a going concern, close it. That's also true. That's right. I mean, if it's not a going concern, stop the bleed. That's what, stop wasting your money on things. But the problem is that these GLCs, these offer patronage opportunities.
And intermediaries.
Yeah, they offer patronage opportunities, and that's why there's a pushback. Right. But if you set those patronage opportunities to one side and look at it from a purely economic perspective, privatization would be the best way.
Conversation for another time.
I mean, that's the only time that we have for today. But for just 1 minute, we always end it this way, Prof. For 1 minute, could you tell us your favorite travel destination and what book are you reading now?
My favorite travel destination at the moment is Ho Chi Minh City. Right. That's my favorite, and I go there regularly. And I'm going I think not next week, but the week after that. I love it. I really love it because it reminds me very much of KL when I first came here to KL. and it's got all that French colonial. I shouldn't be talking about colonial charm, but it's got that French colonial charm. I love.
How about that book? Yeah, you're reading.
I don't read books, but I'm writing some books, and I'm working on a book with my friend Murray Hunter, and we're going to write a book on toxic strategy, not to advocate toxic strategy, but to show how management strategies have turned toxic and how we can identify a strategy that is toxic and what we need to do about it to stop that from happening.
And that will be out next year?
Hopefully it will be out, yes, because we're nearly at the end of this year. Okay. So we hope to get that out next year as soon as possible.
All right, that's it, Adi. This is for this episode with Professor Geoffrey Williams. And yeah, I mean, we touch on the very hot topic GLC just now at the end, just to maybe give a signal to viewers out there that there will be another session with Prof, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I learned a lot, and I definitely felt like I was back in the classroom from here. It was very stimulating.
Does that mean I'm patronizing you like
that's all right.
Grumpy old. It's like supervision.
Rarely do I get to be in a room in a powerhouse able to
Definitely.
So definitely a lot of conversations to be had, and we'll definitely look as well towards talking about GLCs. We did talk about it with Roger a few months back.
Yep.
We were talking about here. Maybe we'll find it another time. So stay tuned on the next episode of Kopitiam Council. Thank you for watching.